bipartisan as possible. Our second measure is the Senate amendment to H.R. 550. However, the committee will be inserting the text of two different measures, the text of H.R. 5543, the No War Against Iran Act, and the text of H.R. 2456 to repeal the authorization of the use of military force against Iraq resolution of 2002. This follows on the House passage of a similar resolution that would restrict the president from using armed force against Iran that the House passed just 2 weeks ago. As the committee is aware, I've long been supportive of Congress exercising its authority with respect to war powers. I'm a firm believer that Congress has a role in committing America's military to battle. The War Powers Resolution of 1973 states clearly that the president cannot commit the United States to an armed conflict without the consent of the United States Congress. This is a debate we should have as a Congress. But once again, the majority continues to not take the need for actual debate seriously. Once again, the majority is pushing ahead on measures of the gravest importance without going through regular order. In contrast to passage of the original AUMF in 2002, neither of these measures has received a hearing or markup in the Foreign Affairs Committee, which has jurisdiction over these matters. In contrast to passage of the original AUMF, it seems likely no amendments will be made in order. And in contrast to passage of the original AUMF, even a motion to recommit, the most basic right offered to the minority, is being taken away. And all following consideration of a resolution 2 weeks ago regarding Iran, which also trampled upon the rights of the minority. Congress should have the opportunity to examine the justifications for the use of military force through a series of hearings and a markup to decide whether these two measures are appropriate. But instead, the majority is pushing them straight to the floor without following regular order. On the No War with Iran Act, I note that I actually supported this measure when it was offered as an amendment to the NDAA. I believed then that there was time for Congress to exercise its war powers and believed that Congress should go through an appropriate hearing process. But the majority has not done so. And since the NDAA passed the House in July of last year, the reality on the ground in the Middle East has changed significantly. Iran has directly attacked a U.S. base in Iraq earlier this month. And just yesterday, rockets struck the U.S. Embassy in Baghdad, although we do not yet know who launched those rockets. Iran continues to back militias and terror groups in Iraq, Lebanon, Syria, and Yemen. And it continues to threaten global trade through the Persian Gulf and the Strait of Hormuz. And if this resolution were to become law at this time, it would completely hamstring the ability of the United States to respond to future acts of aggression by Iran. If Iran were to attack American civilians, regional allies like Jordan and Israel, or attack international shipping through the Straits of Hormuz, the U.S. military would be legally prevented from firing a single shot until after the successful completion of a bicameral legislative process to enact law authorizing the use of force. Mr. Chairman, we could and should continue to hold hearings and evaluate U.S. policy with respect to Iran and with respect to the entire Middle East. But without hearings and regular order, the No War with Iran Act is premature and potentially dangerous. I feel even more strongly about the second measure, which repeals the authorization for the use of military force against Iraq resolution of 2002. Much like the measure concerning Iran, no hearings and no markups on this measure have been held, and this resolution is being pushed straight to the floor without following regular order. Mr. Chairman, this is simply unacceptable. Members on both sides of the aisle, myself included, agree that an updated authorization for the use of military force that better describes our current threats is appropriate. But until we can reach agreement on what a new AUMF should look like, it is inappropriate to repeal the existing one. To be clear, I personally believe that we should rethink the 2002 AUMF, but we should not repeal it without a replacement. This measure fails to do that. Instead, it simply repeals the 2002 AUMF without providing any updated authorities. If this legislation were to pass, it would call into legal question many counterterrorism operations in Iraq and the broader Middle East, which is a reckless approach that will hamstring our military and prevent us from confronting ongoing deadly threats against our country. We need to follow regular order. we need to hold hearings on what a new AUMF should look like. And we need to reach a bipartisan, bicameral agreement on a new AUMF. I believe we can get there, Mr. Chairman, but simply moving a repeal measure straight to the floor without any hearings or any discussion of what a new authorization should constitute is not it. Finally, Mr. Chairman, I'm most disappointed in the procedural gimmicks the majority is using to bring up and push through these two war power measures. In bringing them up as amendments to a Senate-passed bill, the majority is using a procedural path that will blatantly deny the minority its traditional right under the rules to amend the measures through a motion to recommit before final passage. Under House rules, the minority is not allowed to offer a motion to recommit on any House measures that have been passed by the Senate. It is no coincidence that this procedure has been adopted on this measure. In fact, according to an article that appeared in Politico last Thursday, that appears to be precisely the majority's intent. Representative Khanna, who's the lead sponsor of the No War with Iran Act, is quoted as saying, quote, Majority Leader Hoyer has done an excellent job figuring out a procedure of how we can get a vote on the floor on these bills without an MTR that is non-germane and could divide the caucus. I seek unanimous consent to insert a copy of this article into the record.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As well as a letter from the Republican leader demanding the majority suspend consideration under these parameters.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, the motion to recommit has been part of House rules since the very beginning of the chamber and has been in its present form since 1909. It is the minority's last opportunity to seek to amend the bill on the floor before final passage. When Republicans were in the majority, we never sought to restrict the use of that right, recognizing its importance to the chamber. And yet, despite high-minded promises of openness and respect for minority rights that we heard from the new majority at the beginning of this Congress, we are instead seeing new procedures initiated and deployed by the majority that threaten the continued use of the motion to recommit. If the majority continues on this path, it will be a de facto change in House rules without a debate and a direct vote on the floor. And it will be done in a below the board way, simply because you're either too scared of what the minority will offer or too afraid to defend your own unpopular policies. Someday somebody's going to have to explain to me this fear that you guys have about MTRs. I've dealt with them my entire career. They're not hard to vote yes on or no on, but to be afraid to vote is just incomprehensible to me. I'm particularly distressed that the majority is making this move now on an issue of such importance to the nation. The decision to make war is the single most consequential decision Congress can make. I was under the impression that the majority wanted to have a sincere conversation about Congress's war powers. But given the procedural decisions that have been made and given the fact that the majority is now attempting to use a procedural gimmick to silence a minority, I'm now questioning that good faith. Let me be perfectly clear, Mr. Chairman. The motion to recommit is a right that the minority has held in its present form for over 100 years. Republicans never even considered taking away this right when we were in the majority. The Democratic majority has already taken away our right once and has threatened to take it again because they cannot or will not defend the progressive liberal agenda they seek to foist on the American people. For the present majority to do so now on a matter of such grave importance and using a procedural gimmick to avoid a vote by the entire House does a disservice both to the institution and the entire nation, and I stand with my leader in demanding that you change course immediately. With that, I yield back.
Well, thank you very much, and I appreciate your